Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited. Now in our last episodes you saw we did our quick little Hemi refresh here. We are ready to drop this engine back into the Magnum. Now it is my hope and my goal that by the end of this episode we're going to hear this thing run. So we're just about ready to drop our engine back into our engine bay, but there are two more things we need to do before we do that. One of those is to reinstall our engine spacer plate here between the engine and transmission. Now when you put this thing on, remember that the curved side goes in towards the block itself, and you just go ahead and slip it on to the dowel pins. Now, you can put this on after you install the flex plate, but it's really a lot trickier because it's so much tighter tolerance in there. So much easier just to put it on beforehand. Now, I will warn you that this flex plate or this spacer plate will fall off of these dowels about 100 times while you're trying to install the engine. It's really annoying. Just expect that. It's not that big of a deal. You just have to keep slipping it back up onto those dowel pins. Now we need to install our flex plate, and of course we'll want to add some Loctite to those flex plate bolts. We're going to go ahead and torque those bolts down to 70 foot-pounds. Now notice that the pattern of the bolts here on our flex plate is not equal distance between all the bolts. This means that this flex plate will only go on in one specific orientation. So what you can do is you can either mark the flex plate beforehand before you take it off, or you can just set it up here and keep spinning it around until you find the correct orientation. There we go, we're all set. Let's go ahead and get this heart drop back into the Magnum.
Show you what happens. Pass me the mic and I'll show you with action. I feel this pain, you already know. Turn that to gains, let my money show. I've got these things that I can't let go. Watch me turn this life into something that you could never own. I feel this pain, you already know.
So we have our engine generally in place here. Definitely a much tighter fit than I was expecting to get this guy back in here with those exhaust manifolds on, but we're able to snake it in here. Now we need to go underneath, get that spacer plate back up on the dowel pins, make sure it's mating correctly with the transmission, make sure our exhaust manifold studs are going down into the mid pipes as they are supposed to be as well. Now one thing I wanted to point out here, that flex plate that we just put on, of course it has the 6 holes there for the torque converter bolts. If you'll notice, one of those holes has slotted edges, means it's slightly narrower than all the rest, which are just your typical round hole. What you want to do is line it up to where the slotted hole is the very first torque converter bolt you put in. What that does is it centers it and it allows it to where all of the other torque converter bolt holes line up perfectly. If you start with just one of the regular round holes, by the time you get around that slotted hole, it'll be misaligned just a little bit and the bolt won't go in. So save yourself some time and effort and start with that slotted hole first. Whew. All right, definitely a bit of a battle there. Those motor mount bolts are much more difficult to get to with the cylinder heads on, obviously. In this situation, I'm almost thinking it might have been better to just put the block back in and then reinstall the cylinder heads afterwards, because I did not realize just how tight these vehicles are. This is the first Magnum I've worked on, and let me tell you, for whatever reason, even though as far as I know the chassis part is identical, the Challengers, Chargers, 300s I've worked on have given me a little bit more room in there. I'm not sure if these Magnums are just a little bit tighter or what the deal is, but it was definitely a fight. However, we got those motor mount bolts in, we have it bolted up to the transmission. Now is the part where you really get to feel like you're making some progress. We're gonna go ahead and get this engine hoist out of the way. The engine is sitting on its own weight again, and something about that just feels really good. So even though you have a long way to go yet, it's milestones like that that help keep your motivation going. Now that we've gotten to this point, it's basically just a whole lot of reassembly. I don't have any specific tips and tricks for you at this point. We're just gonna reassemble everything that you disassembled. If I come across something that I really think you need to know, I'll go ahead and put that in the video. But to this point, let's go ahead and start reassembling this thing. Okay, one tip I do have for you is when you're reinstalling your coolant heater tubes here, there are little O-rings here on the ends of these tubes. I highly recommend that you actually change these O-rings out. There's a lot of kits that actually come with those O-rings in there, but don't just stick them back in, because these O-rings in particular go through so many heat cycles, they really like to flatten out and you could have a coolant leak. And even worse, what I've seen is when people start to have a coolant leak, they just glob up a bunch of RTV silicone in here and jam it back in and hope that's going to fix it. Many times it does not. Now you have a coolant leak and a giant RTV mess. So while you're in here, go ahead and swap out these O-rings with some new ones. Of course, I am not, because again, everything's coming right back out again, so not a problem. I'll also say too, because I forgot to mention this, go ahead and lube up these O-rings. As I've mentioned many times before, on any sort of a rubber O-ring, make sure you lube it up first before you install it, because it's very easy for a dry O-ring to, one, it'll fight you and be a huge pain in the butt to get it back in, but two, you could very easily catch it on something and cut it, nick it, tear it, any of that, and then it defeats the purpose of the O-ring to begin with. Now it's completely up to you guys what you use to actually lube up those O-rings with. I use this trans gel stuff because, again, as a transmission tech forever, I've always had this stuff around, and I find that it works really well because it's more of a gel type thing than anything else, and it adheres very well to O-rings. So you guys know, I like to be as transparent as I possibly can with you. And remember just a few minutes ago when we were putting those coolant lines back in and I said, hey, go ahead and replace these O-rings on here because they have a high potential for leaking. But I didn't do that. Yeah, I'm sure you can guess what happened. I put this thing in, and the moment I started filling with coolant, it started pouring out of the water pump there. So I got myself on that one. I played myself. So do as I say, not as I do. I went ahead and had to go and grab another O-ring for that thing and slap that in there. We got that taken care of. One more tip I have for you guys is that when you're reinstalling your EGR tube on here, make sure that you have a gasket kit that includes the new silicone seal here that actually goes on that EGR tube. This seal will tend to deform over time. In fact, I'll show you a close-up of this one right now and how deformed it actually is. And what that means is that after you do the repair and put the tube back in, it may not seal properly anymore, and then you end up with a vacuum leak right here. Now this can actually set a code for that vacuum leak, and it can be very frustrating to try to locate the source of that leak when in fact it is coming from this particular seal right here. So again, replace that seal, you'll be in good shape. So as you saw, I went ahead and topped off the engine with just some very basic engine oil here. This is a Napa branded 520 semi-synthetic oil. Very cheap, basically what you would normally expect to find in a Hemi engine of this vintage. I thought it'd be a good choice for our oil pump tests, so that's what we went with. I went ahead and put about 7.5 quarts in here. Normally, an oil change on these is exactly 7 quarts. However, because I did have the pan completely off and completely cleaned out, I went ahead and put a little bit of extra oil in there. That way we should be pretty close. I may even have to add just a little bit more. Now, as far as adding coolant goes, we want to make sure we get the system fully bled properly. We do not want to have the block completely dry when we're trying to run this thing. So on most water pumps of these things, not all of them, but most of them, there will be a bleed port here right on the front of the engine. Go ahead and remove that bleed port screw, the little plug there, and go ahead and add your coolant to your reservoir until the coolant pours out of that little hole. Then add your plug back in and then top off the reservoir. That will get you pretty close, somewhere in the ballpark. And then after the engine has been through a heat cycle or two, go ahead and watch your reservoir and add coolant as needed from that point. All right, we are just about ready to fire this thing up to see if all of our hard work is worth it. Now, one thing, as I've shown you guys before, what I like to do is before I actually try to start this thing, I'll go ahead and hook up my scan tool and check and see if there's any codes. Now, the reason for that is because everything is still cold right now and you can reach your hand up into very tight areas and plug stuff back in if you forgot. So it's a good step just to double check, see if you have any codes, and then you can see, oh, I forgot that plug or I left that one unplugged. While it's still nice and cool, you can stick your hand up in there and plug it in. So let's go ahead and check that out right now. Now, some of you may remember that some months ago, a company called TopDon sent me out this BT100 battery tester, and I liked it a lot. In fact, I liked it so much that it stays with me in my box at work because I use it all the time. There's a lot of different scenarios that come up that I need to do a quick battery health check, and this thing works fantastic for that. Now, they were kind enough to send me out another scanner here. This is the Artidiag 600S. Now, this is a much more capable scanner than your standard powertrain scanner. This thing will also do your automatic transmission, your ABS, and airbag codes. So I think it pretty much covers the spectrum of what your standard do-it-yourselfer kind of guy will want to do with a scan tool. I like those just basic powertrain scanners because they're very cheap, they're very easy to use. However, they do have a lot of limitations. I'm excited to give this thing a try and see if it has the capabilities that I think are necessary for your standard do-it-yourself guy. Now, this does come with a slightly higher cost than your standard powertrain scanner. This one is about $270, but I still feel like that's an extremely reasonable cost considering how my professional scanner was $1,800 and that was still on the cheap end. One of the things I like about this scanner already is the impressive size of it. You got a 5-inch screen here, makes it very easy to see what exactly is on here. All right, so you can click on auto scan and it'll do a VIN scan here and actually look to see what vehicle you're working on. Now we know what vehicle we're working on. It's got an 05 Magnum in here. We can do a system scan on there. And what it's going to do is it's going to scan all of the modules at once to look for DTCs in any of those. Now, what you can do is you can also choose by individual module so you don't have to do that full scan each and every single time. Now, when I put this engine back together, I specifically left the intake air temp sensor unplugged to give you guys an example of what I was talking about, where if you look at the codes first, you can say, oh yeah, intake air temp sensor. I remember I didn't plug that in. So it's just a quick reminder that you can run out there, click it in before you try to start the engine. All right, it's also telling me my O2 sensor bank 1 circuit 1 circuit is high. Now that means that on this bank, the driver's bank here, I forgot to plug in that first O2 sensor. So there you go, right there in action. I forgot a plug. This told me right there, oh, that's right, I did forget that plug. Also on top of the intake air sensor, temp sensor that I did intentionally leave unplugged. Now this seems to be pretty good so far. Let's try a couple of other functions with it. Okay, we do have an active code for steering angle sensor not initialized. That is the clock spring inside the vehicle, and there is a procedure that you actually run to get that code to go away. There's a alignment procedure, I guess you would say. And it'll be interesting to see if this scan tool is capable of doing that alignment procedure. Hold on just a moment, we'll figure that out. So yes, you can in fact do a steering angle sensor reset on this vehicle. So when we're talking about these mid-grade level scanners, one of the ways that I like to judge their value is by judging what sort of miscellaneous functions they can do. That's what they call it in the Chrysler world, also known as special functions, anything like that. So I'm talking about procedures that normally have to be done at a dealership or something like that to reset things, such as the steering angle sensor. Now this particular scan tool has quite a bit of options for it. It can do a ABS brake bleed, DPF regeneration, which is diesel particulate filter regeneration, electronic throttle learn procedure, you can reset your oil monitoring system, electronic parking brake reset, tire pressure reset, so the TPMS sensor, the steering angle reset like we've already discussed. So it has quite a bit of special functions on there. And let's talk about this for a minute, because when you're thinking about the overall price of a scanner like this, like I said, around $270 for this particular scanner itself, the dealership I work for currently, our hourly rate is $175. Now, putting aside the ridiculousness of that statement for just a moment, the steering angle sensor procedure reset that we need to do here is going to take an hour minimum. So therefore, if you had to take this into the dealership to have that steering angle sensor reset done, that's $175 out of your pocket right now. This thing costs $270 and you get to keep it and use it for other functions down the road. So to me, financially, it makes sense to go with one of these mid-grade scanners because they are so much more capable than just your basic powertrain scanners. So I definitely encourage you guys, if you are interested in something like that, check these guys out. The link will be in the description for this particular scan tool. Now, as far as shortcomings go for this scan tool, just a couple of things I've noticed. One is that it does seem to take a little bit longer than usual for its little communication periods, like when it actually finds the VIN of the vehicle to identify what kind of vehicle it's working off of, and also when it's moving between modules. There is a fairly large delay there, at least a few seconds more than I would expect. However, it's not that big of a deal. The other thing is, I was really hoping that this scan tool would come with a misfire monitor. I think that's an extraordinarily useful tool, but it doesn't seem to have that capability. However, I think it might be able to be upgraded to that. I'm going to look into that and let you guys know on the screen right now. But a misfire monitor is an incredibly useful tool because you can actually watch live and see which cylinders are the ones that are misfiring, causing you problems. Really helps to narrow things down a lot. As it sits, it doesn't seem to be equipped with that feature, but I'll see if that can be added. Now we get to the fun part, the tool giveaway. Now I spoke to TopDon already and they are willing to give away another one of these BT100 battery testers to one of you guys for absolutely free. Now there's 3 things that I'm asking that you do. None of them are complicated and they don't cost any money whatsoever. One of those is to give a like to this video. The second of those is to put a comment in the comments below, and you have to include the word TopDon somewhere in there. I'll put that across the screen now. I don't really care what your comment is about, but as long as you put TopDon somewhere in your comment, that means you wish to be entered into this little giveaway for this battery tester. Now the third thing you have to do is TopDon themselves have requested that you go to their Facebook page and give them a like there. Now there's no way that we can actually police this in any way, shape, or form. We're totally going off the honor system here, but I would appreciate it, guys. If you want to support me, support them as well. Go to their page, give a like to their Facebook page. Again, put that comment in the video with TopDon on there and give a like to this video. At the end of a week's time, I'm gonna put all of those names together. Everyone who entered in, I'm gonna put all those names together, have it randomly generated to find out which one of you is the winner, and TopDon will send you one of these for absolutely free. So let me talk about what we're going to do as far as converting over our coil packs to those dual coil packs instead of the single with the spark plug wire running to the opposite bank. You guys know I don't like the way that looks. I think it just looks clunky. Those dual coil packs on there, to me, that is iconic Hemi look. So here's what we're going to do. Now, I am fortunate enough that I have a couple of wiring harnesses laying around so I could snag the connectors from them. So I do have 8 of these coil pack connectors for the newer style coils. They are in fact a different plug than what comes on these 05 and older ones. So that's something to be mindful of. So essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to cut the original coil pack connectors off and splice in these new coil pack connectors. Unfortunately, what I was originally hoping for is that you could just disassemble these connectors and use the same pins in these connectors. That's not the case. The pins are different. So we're actually going to have to cut the wires, crimp, and solder these ones on. So that's kind of our process today. We're going to do that to all 8. Now, is this going to work? There's no reason why it shouldn't. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't. I do have the wiring diagrams available to me to look up and make sure that I'm connecting to the right wires. Again, this should absolutely work, but if it doesn't, we're gonna hold on to the original connectors. We can just cut these off, reinstall the original connectors, original valve covers, all that, and make the swap very easily back to what it was before. Here's a close-up of what the original coil pack connector looks like. And then here's what the new coil pack connector looks like. Even though it's a 3-wire plug, they still only use 2 wires in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and cut this wire loom back here a little bit, get rid of this shielding tape here, and go ahead and cut it at the exact same length as the new connectors are, so that when we put them in, they fit properly. We'll go ahead and solder and heat shrink these things into place, and then we'll be ready to go. So the thing to remember about either an injector wiring setup or these coil pack wires is that one of the wires is going to be a shared circuit between all of the injectors or all of the coils, and the other one is going to be the individual trigger wire. So that makes it fairly simple as far as wiring it up. When I look at the wiring diagram, I'm going to see one that is just a shared circuit between all of them, and that in this case is going to be the middle wire on the new connector. So I just have to figure out which one that is, connect that, and then the other one is going to be my trigger wire. So it looks like our brown and yellow wire here is going to be our shared circuit among all of them. You can see that all of the coil pack connector wires have that brown and yellow wire. The other wire is going to be individual, and that is in fact the coil control wire. So again, when we're wiring these new plugs, our shared circuit is going to be this middle pin here, which on these is brown and white. So the brown and white will be connected to the brown and yellow, and then the other one will connect to the opposite. So really simple conversion here. Let's go ahead and get this going. Okay, so my butane torch was out of butane when I actually was doing that new coil plug install, but you can see here that we have the new plugs installed on there, and it runs absolutely perfect. So we no longer have those big ugly spark plug wires running across the intake. Now, yeah, I'm not super happy with how it looks right now. Of course, I'm going to relume all of this anyway, but I might change it up just a little bit more. Now, since this engine has been sitting for quite some time, I don't know exactly how long it's been, but it's been at least 2 months that it's been sitting here. I'm expecting there to be quite a bit of rattle noise coming from these lifters right when I first fire it up. So I want to make sure I get as much oil pressure in there as I can before I actually fire this thing. So one of the techniques I use to do that is I'll go ahead and pull the fuel pump fuse and go ahead and just turn the engine over for at least 3 or 4 cycles on this thing to really try to get that oil pumped up and built into all those. It'll still rattle a little bit, but not quite as bad as if I just dry fire it the way it is. Okay, we've got our fuel pump fuse out. Let's go ahead and spin the engine over several rotations, try to build up that oil pressure. Battery is pretty weak in this car, so hopefully we can get this thing started. So this is where we see if all of our hard work pays off. I've actually got the scan tool open right now to all the different data functions here so I can watch and see everything as it's running, make sure we don't have any problems. Let's go ahead and cycle the key here, build some fuel pressure. I hear the fuel pump, so that's a good start. Looks like we got plenty of fuel in the tank. Moment of truth, let's do it. Oh, there we go. Like I said, she's going to be a little rattly at the start here. Let this thing build some oil pressure. Now, of course, you're going to have all the oils and everything burning off of the exhaust, so that's all the steam and stuff you see here. Definitely those lifters are very, very rattly right now. We're gonna have to give them a little while. Usually if you bring the engine up to full temperature and then run it through a full cycle as far as making it drop into MDS mode and then come back out, usually that's good enough. Well, as I'm sure you can hear, this thing is definitely still pretty ticky. We got to get at least one of these lifters to quiet down. Most of the other ones have already quieted down. We still have one that's really got kind of a hard tick to it. So we're going to keep running this thing, make it go through a heat cycle or so just to try to get that thing to really quiet down where it should be. But I do have some good news that our conversion to our dual style coil seems to have worked perfectly fine. No issue with that whatsoever. So I'm very, very happy about that. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up these wires here. That way they'll be all fully loomed up and it'll look just like it did from the factory. Yeah, listen to that. That's already 1,000 times better than it was. I was getting a little bit nervous there, not gonna lie, because I didn't actually replace those lifters, but already you can hear very quiet now. Maybe a tiny little bit of lifter tick in there still. I hear the injector tick, of course. Honestly, this thing sounds great. I'm really happy with this. That's fantastic. So, next thing, guys, next video is going to be the one where we do our oil pump testing. I think it's been something like 7 months since I first talked about doing the Hellcat oil pump on here. So, very excited. I hope you guys are too. We'll see you guys next time on Reignited.